Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Policy, Finance and Development Committee. It is 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2021. My name is Councillor Dean Gamble, and I'm the chair of this committee, and my fellow councillor, Councillor Ian Ridley, is the vice chair. In accordance with the regulations made under Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this remote meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The audio-visual recording will be made available on the Council's website and YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. All meeting participants are reminded to speak slowly and clearly in the direction of the device's microphone at all times. A reminder that mobile phones and other electronic devices should be turned off or put on silent mode, and those participating in the meeting should refrain from taking telephone calls. For the purpose of recording of attendance, I can confirm that the following councillors are present and participating in this remote meeting. Councillors Naveed Allen, Lee Bentley, Bill Bolter, Leader of the Council John Boyce, Linda Broadley, Latif Dar, Robert Eaton, Linda Eaton, myself Dean Gamble, Rudy Joshi, Jeffrey Kaufman, Lily Kaufman, Kevin Lloydell, David Lloydell, and the Vice Chair, Ian Ridley. We also have in attendance from officers, Samuel Ball, trainee solicitor, who's acting as the Democratic Service Officer, Tommy Campbell, the Interim Financial Service Manager, Anne Court, Chief Executive and Head of Paid Services, Philippa Fisher, the Head of Customer Service and Transformation, David Gill, the Head of Law and Democracy and Monitoring Officer, Stephen Tucker, the Democratic and Electoral Service Manager, Adrian Thorpe, Head of Built Environment, and April Lennox, Head of Community and Wellbeing. For the purposes of the regulations, I can confirm that before the remote meeting went live, all participants confirmed that they could see and or hear all other participants. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the Council's adopted remote meeting procedure rules, a summary of which is attached to tonight's agenda for reference. May I also politely remind all participants that they must not act in a disorderly or disruptive manner or otherwise interfere with the committee's proper conduct of its business. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the agenda. Right, we'll skip apologies for absence as we've got full attendance. 2, appointment of substitutes. We don't have any. 3, declarations of interest. No one makes a declaration of interest, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Read, confirm and sign the minutes of the previous meeting in accordance with Rule 19 of Part 4 of the Constitution. Is everyone happy? Thank you. Action 5, action list arising from the previous meeting. There was no action list arising from the previous meeting. Agenda item 6, petitions and deputations. Are there any petitions or deputations?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item agenda 7, draft budget 2021-22 and medium-term financial strategy, pages 9 to 47. It's Tommy taking this.
Right. I was just going to take you through the draft budget report that 2021-22. And the purpose of this report is to advise the committee of the base budget of the budget for 21-22. So it's a one-year budget. We're looking at MTFS budget, and the recommendations are for committee to approve the medium-term financial strategy budget for 21-22 which will be reported at full council on the 18th of February. And there's recommendations, including recommendation paragraph 3.9 regarding charging commercial rates for car parking and implementing the most budget appropriate service delivery methods for refuse and recycling. So what I'd like to do now is, that's the recommendations, is just to take you through the report. So in February last year, 2020, oh, good. Okay. So in February 2020 last year, the budget was approved for a 5-year budget. And what we've done this year is taken the MTFS for 21-22, the base budget, and we've added on additional amounts to arrive at the budget figure here and to show what the actual funding is. So if I take you to, probably the best thing I can do is take you to page 12. I'm going to take you to 12. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. So the total revenue budget we have there is 7.305 million, but you also need to add on another bit for the collection fund deficit. So overall, the budget is 7.505 million. And what this statement shows, it shows you the funding received from other government grants of 2.37 million. And as I mentioned before, the collection fund deficit. And then there's another grant the council receives, New Homes Bonus, 195,000 they'd receive. And we've got, and below the net revenue budget, we also have transfers to and from reserves, which are money that's coming from reserves that was already put in last year's budget that was approved. It's amounts that was approved there, and also some other amounts I'm going to discuss further on in this report. And then if we go to paragraph 3.3, there is an additional 300,000 reserves that's been used to help fund the budget. And if you go down to 3.4, this is the section about the council tax. So what the recommendation is to increase the council tax by £5, which is the maximum limit we can go to. And the way it works is we always take the Band D amount as the average. And included is a staff cost inflation of 2%. And then we've also included contractual inflation of 3.6. General inflation, we've made no allowance for that. Interest rates reflects the recent increase in the Bank of England rates, and we've got a staff and turnover factor of 5%. So these are the sort of things that have included it. And just also mention that with the council tax, the way it operates is that you assume you'll have a 98.5 collection rate, which is pretty standard amongst most of Leicestershire. Then if we go down, the following paragraphs like 3.5 goes into more details about items relating to the budget. We have some items there like 70,000. We have some other items like 70,000 and 59,000, like the pressures on the actual budgets. And also what we've got there, and if we go on to and there's another long lasting COVID impact of 600,000. And then if we go through the other paragraphs, 3.6, the government has given the council, promised to give the council 200,000 in one-off COVID grants for 21-22. And that was, I think, announced a little while ago. And then the other paragraphs go into more detail about the budgets. But if we go down to 3.8 and we look at that box there, it goes on to describe the selective licensing fees. So this year, the intention originally was to use 100,000 of the licensing fees to help fund the budget, but a further 300 is going to need to be used, which that is the idea before was to actually spread that over a number of years, but in order to help fund the budget, we're needing to use it for 21-22. And if you look at paragraph 3.9, it shows that there's a budget shortfall of 250,000 for the 2021-22 budget. And this gap will need to be funded because the council has to put forward a balanced budget at full council on the 18th of February. And the paragraph 3.9 highlights some other recommendations from officers about meeting the gap. There's charging for car parking, and it's got various information from a report dating back to 2017 saying this potentially could generate 150,000 in 21-22. And then we've also got cost effectiveness of refuse and recycling, which would another area that could be looked into. And then moving down to the capital section 4, which is the capital budgets. What's been highlighted there is the new, for the capital new projects, which totals 12.229 million, which is new projects within the general fund are 10.729 million, and then the housing revenue account of 1.5 million. That's the normal amount that's used each year to maintain the repairs and maintenance of the stock. And then the funding of the programme, of the capital programme, will be from borrowing and 10.386. And then we have grants and contributions of 57. And then we have section 106 funding. And then it goes further into details in the box about some other funding we receive. And then with if you go to paragraph 5 with reserves, I'm just having a quick flick through that. The recommendation generally, if you look at 5.3, the council's reserves should not drop below 10% of the net budget. The budget is 7.5 million. So what it's saying is the general fund reserves need to be a minimum of 750,000. So if we go down to table 5.5, which shows you a box of the current reserves. If you notice on the left-hand column, we've got reserves of the current position at the 1st of April 2020 was 1,003,000 general fund reserves. And then the figure for the 1st of April is predicted to be 753,000. This is due to pressures in this current year, 2021, with a Q2 forecasted additional pressure of 250,000 is on this year's budget. So that would reduce the reserves to that figure of 753,000, which is getting to the borderlines of the minimum reserves accounts Alderby and Wigston should hold. And then if I go down the reserves, you've got 3,000 other general reserves, and then 2.195 million was earmarked revenue reserves. What that is for specific projects that have already been earmarked or the spend's been committed, where those reserves are set aside for. And then below the total revenue reserves, you have the capital reserves, which is, for example, money that's committed, or capital grants unapplied, which is grants that are coming in relating to projects that are going to spend that money in future years. And if we go on to the other section, it gives some general information about the budgets. Section 6, I won't go into too many details, and then it just looks to the future, possible things that could happen in the future that would actually affect the budget, and also talks about the income generation that would be needed in order for the budget to balance in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to the page 18, if that's okay, rather than going through each item individually. So if we go to section 8, which is a housing revenue account, keep on going. We'll just wait for that's it. So the housing revenue account, the key thing here is that the council tenants' rents, there's a set formula for the rents to go up, and it's due to be proposed to be 1.5%. What the council is following government guidance in how much the rent should go up, and that's a national policy. And that's based, and part of the formula for that is based on what the September CPI figure is, which is 0.5%. So it's CPI 0.5 plus 1%, and there's a rent increase of 1.5%, which has been applied across the board for all HR related properties and other things like garages, etc. And then item 9, which is the Treasury Management Policy. The council is required each year to put up a Treasury Management Strategy. I've just got a brief paragraph about it, and part of it is we're going to get more fuller details, but the strategy is based on how the budget's set. So the further details will be outlined in the full council report, which will incorporate what's been agreed for the budget. And then the last item 10, which is a proposed scale of fees and charges. Each year, council's required to agree their fees and charges so that they can be applied from the 1st of April 2021. Now, with the fees and charges, there's a range. Some have stayed the same, and where, if you notice, I've got like a 0.5% increase. Some fees and charges are statutory, so they have to go up by a certain amount or stay the same, depending on government legislation. But where it hasn't indicated on the fees and charges, they would have gone up by 0.5%, or sometimes they're rounded up or rounded down. So we don't have odd numbers on the fees and charges. And that's the actual budget report. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions on that, and we've also got the appendices, two appendices that support that information.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. We have a couple of people, councillors, who'd like to ask a question. I'll start with Councillor Linda Broadley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just a little bit concerned in your opening statement, the recommendations. I won't read the whole paragraph, but 3.9 regarding charging commercial rates for car parking and implementing the most budget appropriate service delivery method for refuse and recycling. It also says on page 14, implementing. I was under the impression that this was a review and that it wouldn't be implemented until it had come back to councillors. Am I correct in what I'm saying, that it isn't going to be implemented without it coming back to councillors? Thank you.
Well, in answer to that, what the role of my role is to produce a balanced budget. So recommendations be made in order to balance the budget. Of course, there would be a review, but the council's required to have plans in place in order to balance the budget. So at this point in time, we haven't got exact figures, and I suppose some of these things would be worked up, but we would need to agree a way forward to balance the budget.
I accept exactly what you're saying, but you're asking us to, well, you're asking me and you're asking the other councillors to approve the recommendations. I'm a bit uncomfortable with it saying implementing rather than a review and it coming back. That's just my thoughts. I'm sure Councillor Boyce will have something to say about it.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Broadley.
Okay.
Councillor Boyce.
Let's be absolutely clear. The review of waste in all its guises will come back to a committee for a decision before implementation. But clearly, we are going to implement a review. And clearly, once we have that review, the clarity on the budget going forward, you have to accept this year there is more cloudiness about this budget than probably any budget in most councillors' living memory, owing to COVID. So let's get it clear. The review of waste will take place in all its guises. Hopefully by November, which is roughly how long it will take, there will be clarity on this budget and clarity going forward. And then remember, the word is appropriate. What is appropriate today may not be appropriate then. And therefore, it has to come back to committee for decision of what is appropriate. Beyond that, I might as well quickly say, I will formally move this, the report. It isn't as good as one would hope in the normal circumstances. There is a lot, as I said, of lack of clarity owing to COVID. And I think it's the best we can do in these circumstances, but it is time, unfortunately, where because of COVID, we are going to have to make significant changes.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Councillor Latif Dar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Couple of questions I have on the council tax collections, but before I second John's proposal, can I just clarify with him? He mentioned November. Is going to these new charges we're talking about? Are they coming in April this year or April 23 or 22 rather? Can you clarify that before I go into the question?
Campbell.
Is this the council tax?
No. John, I'm talking about John's proposal. He's moved it.
Okay.
He said the review will come back to committee and will go till November, he said.
Okay.
That's what I would clarify, John Boyce, if you don't mind.
The review is on the waste.
Yeah, if I may, sorry.
Charges.
In its simplest sense, the decision we make in November will also include when we are going to charge from. Clearly, you cannot make this type of decision regarding waste, whether it be to stand still, to make a change or whatever. You can't do it without having the evidence. It will almost certainly have to be consulted on with residents, and therefore the appropriate thing to do is to do our work by November and then take it forward from there, depending on what we decide. But in terms of implementation, clearly I have no idea because we haven't done the work yet.
Okay, fine, thank you. In that case, I will second it. My questions then on council tax. Obviously, the domestic rates we collect on behalf of the government. Now, there's two things. One, if it's below, we don't meet the targets, obviously we suffer the loss. But what if we've been overcharging people? They appeal, they win the appeals. Who refunds them the money? Is it government or us? Same as with the business rates.
Okay.
If we overcharge people, they appeal, they win, do we pay them back? I don't think I've seen that amount anywhere before. We've seen the losses. on the collection, but when we have to pay back, we never see those figures. I don't know if I should be asking this question tonight or on the 18th. If there are no figures available, I can wait till 18th if we get a reply. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. We'll get that information out to you. Right, Councillor Bolter.
Thanks, Chair. Mine is in selective licensing, actually. Last year, budget last year, we were told selective licensing will bring in £800,000 over the 5 years. Front loaded, so most of it would come from the first, well, would have been the first year, but COVID hit, so that's messed things around a bit. But still, you know, £800,000 is the total amount over the 5 year period. That being the case, we're taking some money out this year, which has been paid. So there should be money left to put into the budget for following years. Unless last year's report is wrong, you know, where do we go? Do we believe what we were told last year? Is £800,000 the amount of money it's going to raise or not? And if not, why haven't we been told in the past?
Chair, could I come in on that point?
Yes, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Chair. The position is, in respect to selective licensing, that there are 836 properties which have been identified as licensable. Each of them are due a normal fee of £840, which gives a total of £702,000. So far, we've received 514 applications, which means that we will gross £431,760 by the end of March.
Yes.
You'll be aware, Councillor Bolter, as a landlord yourself, that payment of those fees is in two parts. First part on application, second part on the issue of the full draft licence. We've issued 80 full draft licences. So we currently have cash in the bank of £251 and £272. We've got 430 applications to be processed, which are currently being processed by officers. So there is an outstanding 180,000, which we are confident that we will gather by the end of March, or at least have the invoices out for. On top of that, there are in the region of another 300 properties that we will be pursuing. Those properties will be paying a larger charge. There'll be a £100 penalty for not having registered. In addition, there will be a number of enforcement mechanisms available to the council, which include civil penalties of up to £1,500 for each landlord for failing to register. So we are confident that over the 5 years, the scheme will generate the £800,000 that we said in the budget last year. We appreciate that the figures aren't as good as one would have expected, but unfortunately, as you'll appreciate because you were a beneficiary, we did actually delay the implementation of the scheme to assist people during the course of the pandemic. We are now in a position where we are chasing applications and we'll be moving to enforcement in the next 2 months. I hope that answers the question.
The point I was trying to make, Chair, is the fact that there'll be money coming in over the next 4 years. This is not the end of it. The money coming in over the next 4 years, which can feed into the budget process. So it's not the end of it. It's the beginning of it, but there's more money to come into the budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Bolter. Councillor Jeffrey Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. During the course of the last conversation, it did occur to me that it would have been safe that Councillor Bolter declares an interest, I think. I didn't realise it, and I'm sure he didn't realise the implication at the start of this. But he's almost declared an interest during his conversation, but I think it would be a good idea. Chair, we're in an absolute and utter mess financially, and it's not what over COVID has just tipped us over the edge. We've had years and years and years of government cutbacks, and we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. And so whatever happens now is COVID, but it's years of cutbacks and austerity for the local, as far as the local government is concerned, from the national government. I wondered if I could have an answer. I've been in business, or was in business, for a long time. And in 2008, I think it was, I may see my wife nodding, I think there was a recession of big time. And as part of our business, one of the first things we did was to cut down on our expenses. And I've looked down here at the, it may be called cheating, but I've looked down here at the capital program. And if I was running a business, the first thing I would do is either cut the capital program or temporarily adjourn it. It's this year that we're in our mess. And this year, for starters, I can see things in the future that will get us out of this trouble. I think the Bushlow House, getting rid of that millstone round our neck, getting the other things online, like the Oadby swimming pool and stuff like that. So as far as I can see, this is an absolute mess, and anything that I could save in borrowing and spending, I would do. And I wonder if I could ask you to go through to page 20. I wondered if I could go down this list and just ask for some comments, because this is the year we're in a big time mess for something that nobody ever dreamed of would happen. In the wildest nightmare, if they'd have made a film out of this, it would have been a good story. So before people shout that it doesn't count because it's the off the capital program, can I just go through and speak about a couple of things? Now, is this the year that we want to spend £7.5 grand improving the Christmas lights? Down here on items 5 and 6 are 2 vehicles costing £63,000. I'm not saying they don't need replacing, but what I did was to make my vehicle last a year longer. So unless there's an extremely good case that it's either dangerous on the road, the wheel's about to drop off, or there's a massive repair bill there, I would suggest that we may consider postponing the purchase of that. If I can go down, by the way, I should say the item 2 on this list, I think that probably is an emergency from reading what it's going to be used for. But we can go down to item 8, Oadby Cemetery. Now, I know that that building needs maintenance and will need maintenance and repair, but at the moment, it's keeping the workman's tools in it. Unless it is dangerous, falling down, or really something like that, please, will we think about postponing that for a year? Because this is the year we're in big trouble. If I can then go down to, well, the Oadby pool, I understand, public Wi-Fi, sports facilities, it's money coming in, and, well, perhaps the Uplands Park Pavilion, a replacement boiler. Well, if it's not working or it's unsafe, perhaps we need to do it. But if I can take you on page 22 to item 14. Now, I've just mentioned that we have a desire to get rid of Bushlow House. So is it really true that we're going to spend £28,000 resurfacing part of the car park? Or, as some people have told me, this may be a clerical error down here. It may be a chimney, but down on this capital program, it's down as tarmacking the car mark on the left in Bushlow House. Very clear what's down here. And also, I think there was Wixton Cemetery. I'm not so sure about the resurfacing. Can that be postponed for a year? I think I've saved out, if it can be, I would have spent less than 110,000. Now, I know it's from the capital program, but this is a bad year. And anything we can avoid spending this year, I would suggest is something we ought to be doing. Now, I haven't seen the rest of the capital program, and I don't know how or why these particular items have been selected to go on there. Because I only found out this afternoon that we do have other money in the capital program of doing some resurfacing on East Street car park, which I haven't seen down there, or perhaps I've missed it somewhere. So all I'm saying is this is a serious year with serious problems. Can we avoid spending some or most of that money this year? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kaufman. Would an officer like to respond? Or shall we ask for those items to be looked at to come back to full council? I'll leave it up to officers.
Chair, certainly in respect to the issues that are raised about the cemetery and Bush Slow car park, they fall within my service area, and I would like to speak to the manager to get her view on it before I commit to anything.
So if we could have a report to full council on the items Councillor Kaufman has raised, that could be done. Thank you. Councillor Kevin Lloydell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Connie, for the running commentary on the budget. Can I go through page by page, if I may?
Yeah.
And just ask for clarification on one or two items. For example, if you go to page 12, and we go to the bottom, where it talks about application fees, planning application fees, 59,000, reduction in anticipated application fees. Okay. So could I say, what are you doing to mitigate that foreseeable reduction for the future?
And Chair, if I could answer to that question. So with that, obviously the COVID situation, Adrian, please feel free to jump in with this one. There's been a reduction in the amount of planning applications, I think it was a couple larger organisations. So obviously that's put a pressure on the budget and going forward. And we're still in the COVID situation at the moment. So my understanding, there's still going to be pressures in the amount of fees we're going to receive going forward. But Adrian, would you like to comment on that one?
Yes, I can make a comment on that. The reason that the budget is proposing a reduction in planning application fees is that, as members will be aware, the local plan has allocated land for a number of strategic sites and directions for growth. And the planning applications for those have come in over the last few years. So the budget, for example, for this year was put together on the basis that we would receive a significant amount of fees in relation to those applications. The majority of them have now been submitted. So when we budget for next year's budget, we have to take into account that we won't get fees to the extent that we've had in the past for the strategic sites. And the majority of our fees will be in relation to household applications, but it's significantly less than we're able to bring in through the major applications. So that's the reason we've had to budget for a lower income next year in relation to the planning application fees. But what I will say is that we've looked to increase the cost of our pre-application advice. So hopefully that will mitigate the impact to some extent of the reduction in application fees.
Can I just have a short mention on is the policy then to operate a deficit throughout? Because at what point do you balance the budget? You can't have a policy that says we'll operate a deficit all the time. You've got to work towards a balanced budget. How are you going to balance the budget?
Chair, I can answer that question. So obviously with the way the budgets is set, there's also income targets, and the planning fees is part of that income target. So obviously when we're setting the budget, we have to look at what income is possible, which has been highlighted by Agent that we're going to have a shortfall. So we have to look at ways of balancing the budget. So that's part of the reason why we had that 250,000 shortfall in the budget. So we still got the cost of the service, people providing the planning service. So we've still got to meet those costs.
So you've then got to cut your cloth accordingly. Sorry, I don't mean to be. I'm just
I appreciate your point, but you still got that overhead resource. So you still got costs. So even if your income drops down, you can't say let's just lose someone, because you're still providing a planning service. So you agree, you have to cut your costs, and obviously as officers we'll try and reduce expenses, but you still have overheads to meet.
Yeah, well, that's where you have to start looking at your overheads to see how you can reduce them. But okay, thank you very much for that. That's okay. We need to keep an eye on that and reports obviously throughout the year to ensure that deficit is coming down. Okay. Is there anybody else want to speak, or can I carry on, Chairman?
Carry on, Councillor Bolter.
All right, until somebody wants to. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Coming back to page 1336, it suggests there that whilst the government has given over 200k for the C19, does that actually cover the actual cost incurred by the council?
Well, the answer to that is no, because what you've got to take in, although we're getting funding in and we've had various different grants this year, we've lost on income. So the council income that would normally be generated to balance the budget, we're not getting all of that. And even though we can claim for some of it back, it's only a certain percentage of the income we can get back. So this contribution helps, but it's still we still have pressure on the council's budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Councillor Lloydell, any more questions?
Yes, if you don't mind. Somebody else wants to come in.
Carry on.
Yeah.
It is, again, page 14. And we look at the commercial charging regime for council tax. As we've got some business experts as members in the room, when we talk about commercial charging, will you do a business plan to suggest that what other areas or business are charging for car parkings in and around there, so that we don't become too expensive and the competition is well, let's go somewhere else because it's cheaper there than ours. So you'll do a business plan on that, will you?
Yeah, well, the intention would be to do a business plan and a car parking fee, because as you said in that paragraph, the last report was back in 2017, so we would need to do an updated plan to see how much actual income generation it would be, but this just gives a good estimate, a rough estimate.
Chair, can I interject on that? Again, that falls within my area, and my officers will be tasked to prepare a proposal for members, and it will include a comparison across all of the councils within Leicestershire and nearby and their charging regimes to ensure that we don't find ourselves out of step and make it so that we lose trade. The aim will be to try and maintain trade.
Thank you, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, David.
Lloydell.
Can I carry on?
Yeah.
Sorry, anybody else just stop me? Just an observation on the paragraph, which is cost-effective refuge and recycling. The terminology here is a gold standard, which is something that I don't sign up to, because what we do is provide a standard that our residents have asked for, and it's a good standard, and it's a standard that we should be proud of. We don't want to use it as a whip to say we operate a gold standard, so we have to lower standards. I understand that. That's just an observation. It is. Bear with me. Go to page 16, and this is where, again, the business entrepreneurs in amongst us, when we look at page 6.1, it talks about the in the dark with respect to funding post 21-22. I assume then that means we're on a single year settlement each time. Is that right, Connie?
Yeah, I'm just checking the thing. So for this financial year, this is obviously a single year settlement, because one of the problems when setting this year's budget is obviously regarding how we're going to be funded in the future. There are some uncertainties what the government is going to fund us. So even like for instance, the financial settlement, we've had a provisional settlement, but we haven't had the final one. So that was the intention that's why we've got a 1 year plan at this point in time. So going forward, it depends on the circumstances, what the situation is at the time. I think
that makes it difficult for any authority to plan for the future, doesn't it?
It does. So that's the sort of problems that's across the board at the moment, because in last year's budget, February 2020, obviously an MTFS of, I think it was 4 or 5 years was put forward. But obviously part of that funding is relying on government funding, grants, and there is an uncertainty with some of the grants that are going to be funded, that the government's going to fund us. So there is a grey area in going too far into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Can I stop you there, Councillor Bolter, and come back to you?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. Just on the funding issue, putting it in a very simple sense, the government have been going through a fairer funding review for some time. It was due to be in place, well, actually already, if I remember rightly, initially. It's clearly been put back. It's unclear when that will be. Certainly the runes, as it were, the guess in the dark is that actually it's not good for district councils. So that's another threat to us on the horizon. But basically that's one of the great uncertainties, as is understanding and applying and getting paid for the COVID effects on councils. There is still significant uncertainty. And in another sense, if you take our leisure income, if it was completely in-house, you had one regime, completely out of house is another regime in terms of repayment. So it's terribly difficult to know which was the best. So until COVID is over and the effects have gone, I think long-term financial planning will be extremely difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Councillor David Lloydell.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify something that to Dave Gill, on your comparison that you said about car parking across the Leicestershire area, are we going to be doing a comparison of, one, the charges of what they charge and for how long, and also what shops or type of shops they have within that area? I think that is crucial, that needs to go in there, because that is the draw for coming to those areas.
We can certainly look at that. I mean, some of the areas will have long stay and short stay, and the short stay car parks will be in the areas with the highest footfall, such as in Melton, in the town centre, where people go to visit the shops. The long stay car parks tend to be further out and tend to be used by people that work within the area as opposed to shopping. So we will be certainly making sure that we share the comparison between the short-term and long-term, and as far as we can, we will make sure that we give some indication as to the nature of the locations of the car park. So if it's within a commercial centre, whether it's in an industrial centre, whether it's in a residential centre. I think to try and identify every single shop that's in an area is going to be a huge piece of work, which won't necessarily add much to the overall picture.
Yeah. In terms of types of business, thank you. Sorry, the other thing was, in terms of that, is will we be engaging or consulting with our local businesses to look at a partial refund scheme for parking, such as if they are coming into a supermarket, they can, if they've bought within that supermarket, they present their voucher and get £1 back or something like that.
Yes, we'll be looking at all options and assessing the viability of such schemes as you say, of almost cashback, where you can refund your parking ticket in shops. There are a number of those schemes across the county. We'll be looking at those and taking advice from them as to how effective they are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Anything else, Councillor David Lloydell?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bill Bolter.
Thank you. Can I just say something with Mr. Gill, and for clarity? When the council was debating whether or not to introduce selective licensing, I returned interest and took no part in any of those debates. But once it becomes council policy, I did consult with Mr. Gill, unless his advice has changed since, in that I've got no further interest than any other member of the council. It's a council policy affecting many, many people, so I need to declare a special interest in that. This evening, I just did a technical point on about finance and putting money in the budget for future years. And that's my comment. Mr. Gill wants to correct me. We had a conversation. I did try and get in touch with him today, but he was a little busy. But if Mr. Gill could confirm that just for the minutes, so I'm not getting myself in any great difficulty.
Certainly, Councillor Bolter, it's my view that on this evening's matter, you don't have a pecuniary interest because we're not deciding, A, whether or not to adopt the policy, or B, the level of the charge for the selective licensing. That matter has been dealt with. And as far as I'm concerned, what we're looking at tonight is the overall budget and how the proceeds of that scheme is spent. And that will not affect you personally. Because once you've paid it, it's within the council's coffers and it's for the council to determine how it's going to spend. That's why I didn't raise the point at the opening when Councillor Gamble asked for declarations of interest. If I felt that you'd got an interest, I would have been nudging you at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Alam.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question with regards to car parking and car park charges. Will local stakeholders in terms of faith groups, the church, the mosque, the various faith organisations that we have allied to the businesses, will they also be consulted as part of your business plan? And in terms of charging them when they come for prayers, which probably are only about, let's say, 40, 50 minutes on one particular day, I was just wondering whether or not that would be considered as part of the sort of overall business plan.
If I can come back. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we will be consulting with everybody. Faith groups, religious groups, business groups. It will be a widespread consultation, and we will look at the various options that are available to us, ensuring that the scheme that is proposed when it's finally proposed to members is one that is the most cost-effective and efficient, and provides members with the income that they've requested, and also comfort that we have done all that we can in making contact with all of those different groups.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. That's it, Mr. Councillor Allen. Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding the car parking, I think members know my opinion regarding this, and I remain unconvinced that charging for car parks would bring any significant revenue in. But I look forward to Mr. Gill's report on this later in the year, and I look forward to being convinced that it's actually required. Personally, I don't support it, and that's quite known, but we've still got to discuss it. So we have a problem with our revenue, and we need to increase our revenue. And obviously you're looking at car parking charges to increase the revenue that the council can use to fund its services. But there's also ongoing revenue costs within car parking, i.e. enforcement, maintenance of machinery, all that sort of stuff. Enforcement being quite a big charge because that involves people. But there are also capital costs involved in here, i.e. the machinery, the technology that would be used. So can I be assured that Mr. Gill will be looking at the most cost-effective technology to be used here if you're intent on increasing revenue? Basically, the best technology is vehicle recognition systems, because that gets rid of the human enforcement being around, because we can't have somebody wandering all around the car parks, taking registration numbers and comparing the times they came in, came out. I need to be assured that the capital cost of implementing such a scheme will help to get the revenue that we can spend the highest possible if you want to incur car parking charges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bentley. Mr. Gill?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, a couple of things on that. Firstly, in terms of capital costs, we are currently carrying those capital costs in the general fund, and we have maintenance issues to pay. You've seen on the capital bid there for car parks to be resurfaced and sorted. In terms of machinery, we actually, in the majority of car parks, already have machinery and ticket machines because we charge over 3 hours. So those machines are already there, and the capital cost involved will be a matter of just adjusting them to whatever scheme is agreed. In terms of enforcement, we already pay for enforcement. We pay for CEOs from Harbour to come and patrol our off-street car parks. Yes, there may be a nominal increase because we may want them there further, but they're going through the car parks all the time. So overall, we think that we can contain the initial capital costs to get the scheme in and running, and then that will provide for further capital going forward, should it be successful, to improve the technology that we do have in place. And as Councillor Bentley says, one of the easier ways of doing it is ANPR and things like that, but that would be a longer term project. At the current time, we have machines, we can adjust them. We just need to get a scheme together that is approved by members, and it's a starting point. And once it's in, we'll move forward from there.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Bentley?
Yeah, just to come back on that, I understand that we have the basic infrastructure in place at the moment, but that basic infrastructure is used for anything over 3 hours. You're going to have a massive increase in the use of such infrastructure. And personally, I travel all around the country and I go in loads and loads of car parks in loads and loads of different cities. And when you've got parking meters, it becomes difficult because you get queues, especially in town centres. You need to look at technology to get rid of the human elements. You need to use technology to get rid of people having to walk around car parks. Technology is there. It's a capital cost, but it increases your revenue. You really seriously need to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bentley. Councillor Joshi.
Thank you, Chair. My comment was really going back to 2019, 2020, when we had our last budget by Clive Mason, who we remember as a CFO then. He did mention that we will need to look at our budgets going forward. We hadn't heard of COVID by then. So I think from my perspective, it's all about being progressive. We are in a situation where we don't have enough income. And I'm in full agreement with what has been proposed tonight. Really, yes, there are things to look at. We've got to be proactive rather than reactive. COVID isn't going to go away. I think we've got another year and a half, and that's from a medical perspective. And I work in the hospital, so I've kind of just commenting from that perspective. So we've got to really look forward to how we can actually, yes, save costs, as Councillor Kaufman suggested, but we've also got to try and increase our revenue somehow. And I'm sure the officers will do the due diligence in what we've got to do. So I think we can only budget 1 year at a time at the moment, and I totally agree with that at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joshi, for those wise words. Councillor Latif Dar.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair. I never got an answer to my questions. What I said. Well, I got them in on 18th. Is that so? I never got an answer to what happens. What's happening about it?
Councillor Dodd, I did say that we'll get a report to you with your answers to your questions.
Sorry, you're breaking up. Sorry.
I did say that we will get the answers posted to you.
Oh, not me. Okay, thank you.
No worries. Councillor Kaufman, Jeffrey Kaufman, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. What's this say? You cannot move of it. I don't think I'm doing anything. Can you hear me?
Yeah, fortunately, we can't see you though.
Oh, what's happened now? You can't.
Doesn't matter, carry on.
Right, yeah, improvement. Look, I never ever thought I would say this, but I regretfully have come to the conclusion that we have got to get some income from our car parks. Because as Mr. Gill just said, we're paying out all these things at the moment. The general taxpayer is paying the rates on the car park. We're already paying for enforcement, maintenance, and well, the equipment that's going to have to be replaced because Councillor Lee is Lee Bentley is absolutely right. So the system we've got at the moment is not the one we've got to have for the long term. But I want to make a suggestion that I think it is vitally important that our residents have some benefit out of our car parks for which they already pay for. Our residents, wherever they go in Leicestershire, are charged by other local authorities to park their car. We have a special offer in Oadby and Wigston at the moment with 3 hours free parking, but everybody is shoppers parking, but everybody is benefiting out of this. I would like to see a scheme, when the officers are doing your research, I want to see a scheme where every house that applies for it can have a free parking permit for one car for 1 hour in any of our car parks at once a day or whatever scheme you work out. Not tying your hands, but I want our residents to have some benefit from their car parks. So whatever scheme you have, even if it means charging fractionally more for the people out of town, I want our residents to have something that they can say. And at the same time, you can say to the residents, you can apply for your free car parking thing with your IT computers will work out a system. And if you want one for any other cars that you have at home at this address or registered at this address, well, we charge you 50 quid a year or something like that. But I'm supporting this car parking, A, because we need the income, but it would depend on what we manage to work out for the benefit of local residents. It has been done, not this particular scheme or whatever scheme you come on, it's done in other parts of the country, but I think it is vitally important that our residents have some benefit out of the income that's coming on that. So would you put that on your list of things to work out, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kaufman. Mr. Gill?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In fact, we've already been looking at it, Councillor Kaufman. And obviously what we will need to do is when we look at it, it will have to be assessed in the business case. It'll be done on a cost-benefit analysis and the financial viability of it. What we can't end up with is with a situation that costs us far more to administer compared to the income that's brought in. But it is not something that we've closed our minds to, and we will be looking at it.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Broadley.
Thank you, Chair. Car parking again. I don't like it. You know, my views are well known, but I accept that we have to do this. But I am going to pick up on what Councillor Lee Bentley said and Mr. Gill's response. We do have some machines in very few car parks. If we are looking at this car parking scheme, it has got to be every car park, including South Wigston, much to Mr. Boyce's dismay, but it's got to be all car parks. And very few of our car parks have got these machines in. So there is going to be a cost. Then we're talking about enforcement. Yes, we share the enforcement with Market Harbour, and I don't know if we share with others. There's very little enforcement. They decide where they're going to go on what days. We don't appear, should I say, to have a say in it, because we don't actually employ the enforcement officers. If we're going to cover all car parks, then that needs to be looked at, and the costs associated with the machinery and with the enforcement bringing in. I'm sure Mr. Gill's already going to do that, but I did want to pick up on the fact that we don't have that machinery in every car park, and if these charges going ahead, they should cover all car parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broadley. I'm sure Mr. Gill has noted that. Councillor Lily Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, what Councillor Geoffrey Kaufman said I was going to say, we do need the residents to have some benefit from car parking, all the residents in the borough. So, you know, we have to make sure that that happens and it's cost effective. I know some of the arguments are that the shops are closed, the car parks are empty, there's no footfall in the towns. I don't think we should dwell on that, because times are going to get better. As Geoffrey said, we've been through a recession in 2008, and most of us survived, and we came bouncing back. So I don't think we should look at the business aspect that the shops are gone and they'll never come back, because they will. They may come back in a different form. There may be more entertainment, there may be more food outlets, but they will come back in some form. So we've got to look positively, and we've really got to plan for the future. And I personally think this is one of the way forwards. I don't know, maybe later on when things are better, we may say, okay, to be a bit more competitive, we'll reintroduce the 3 hours shoppers car parking. I'm sure that time will come, but in the meantime, we have to do this and we have to generate income. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lily Kaufman. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. I thought Councillor Lloyd was first. But yeah, I just want to come back to the capital that Councillor Geoffrey Kaufman talked about. Many years ago, I was a local government officer, and we were in charge of budgets, and we were told capital revenue never crossed. So we have the capital's monies. There's no, in terms of addressing the revenue budget, there's no reason to withhold that capital spend. I understand the concerns about resurfacing car park at the council offices and the council offices themselves. But actually, by withholding that money, we are keeping a little bit of money out of the local economy. Our contractors won't have that work. So I would counsel against holding back on capital spending. If the money is there and those improvements need to be made, we as a council should help the local economy by spending it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ridley. Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. Very quickly, just back on car parking for Mr. Gill. The car parking OB at back of Marks and Spencer's, I can't remember what it's called now, they've got quite a number of reserve spaces. Will you take that into account on whether or not we get income from that, please? Okay.
Yes, and, when we do the review, we will identify they're not necessarily reserved; they're actually private. So we will only be able to charge on those car parking bays that belong to the council. So we will build something into the the project plan to ensure that we don't end up ticketing people who are parked on their own private parking bay.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Can I just carry on, Chairman? Again, page 1664. I'll just make one comment, then move on, where it talks about the general lack of direction given currently regarding funding to this authority. I'm not quite sure what that statement is saying, but I'll leave it at that. Page 17, the risk assessment, the audit committee papers, and that's that. Mr. Gill was at the audit committee meeting. The audit was late. It hadn't completed its assessment. It was going to complete it and then let us have a copy of the document. I've still not seen any evidence of the copy of the document yet, Mr. Gill. But I'll point to you with regards to the comment there, and it's an important comment because it says through that audit that the council has a strong record of financial management. That's important because what we're looking at here today is not necessarily a lack of direction from any member of this authority or officers of this authority. The council has a strong record of financial management. That's important. It is. So if you can find out, Mr. Gill, where the audit papers are, so we could have a copy, I'd be very grateful.
I'll do my utmost to locate them for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And okay, and I'll go to the last one very patiently. Last one, promise. Page 18.
That's right, Councillor Lloyd.
When you talk 7.6, staff resources are a key requirement in delivering the services, and I think that that's absolutely right. And it enables the corporate plan to be maintained and managed. So I think a big thank you to those people because it's the staff that create and give us the services that we need and we want. And remember, we always say we'll consult with our residents. So our residents are very important, but our staff also are equally important, if not more, in certain cases. So I'd like to make that statement, if you don't mind, because I think it's important that we embrace them and empower them to be part of this community. Thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Alam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to come back once again with another question. Going back to car parking again and listening to the wise words of Councillor Bentley, there was some things that he mentioned which I also think that we need to consider as well, which is the local residents who live around car parks. The last thing I would want from this situation is that people who don't want to, let's say, park their cars on the car park or avoid a car parking charge will start to fill up the local streets and annoy the residents around them. So I was also just wondering whether or not, as part of your consultation, you'll consider talking to the local residents and picking up on what Councillor Coughlin said about having that 1 hour sort of charge. Maybe that might be a way through in looking at compensating local residents on that. But as I say, my concern is also the local streets and neighbourhoods, that they get swamped with cars and residents complaining that cars are being parked outside their drives, etc. So that's something I'd like you to also kindly consider as part of the overall plan.
Mr. Gill.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That has been noted, and it will be considered. As I said, we an issue around permits. I know that we do have some permits on the Elston Lane car park, which is a historical throwback, and we will be looking at that and see whether we could offer that elsewhere to other people.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. It was raised at a meeting we were at last night by another councillor that's not on this committee, whether or not we would be getting a budget book this year. Is that something that will happen?
Mr. Gill?
as a matter of course, yes, once the budget's been approved, then we normally publish the budget for everybody to see. So yes, there will be a budget book.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going back to Councillor Kevin Lloydell.
Sorry to keep you going on this, but can I just bring you back to page 14, the cost of effective refuge and recycling. One for Mr. Gill, very quickly, for paying for the green waste, which is operated from 1st of February. I've paid mine. There is a problem with regards to people paying. That's somebody come and knocking on my door today, COVID friendly, I hasten to add, wants to pay by cheque, can't pay by cheque, which is not online, she can't do it online. So we helped, and we're very helpful at the customer services, so we did it for her, so that she got no problem with the cost. She wanted to support it, but she couldn't because they won't take cheques. Although she pays her council tax by cheques, but they won't take cheques for this. So it made it very difficult for them to pay, but we've sorted it out. She's paid now, but that's something for the future to look at, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think this is probably one for Philippa. But if a cheque came into the council at Bushlow House and was posted to us, and it was for a green bin, we would accept it. We wouldn't turn it away. But you know, there is a cost to cheques, and we do encourage people to use online where possible. But as I say, we wouldn't want to disenfranchise anybody by not accepting a cheque. I mean, if she's paying her council tax by cheque, she must be sending it here. So therefore, she could have sent the payment here as well.
Yeah, but she was told she couldn't. That's the bit. So I don't want to go into the internet. So I mean, they handled it very well, but she's not online. She doesn't do it. She's an elderly, two elderly people. They're not online, so they don't do things in that way. They do things the old-fashioned way, and we don't want to disenfranchise people that want to support the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kevin Lloydell. Are there any other questions, or anyone else like to say anything at this point in time? Councillor Kevin Lloydell. Hint.
Sorry, Shane, what was... Say again?
Are there any other things you would like to raise on the budget?
Not on the paper itself, but obviously when we come to the recommendations.
Would you like to put that recommendation?
Sorry, Chair, you do have two hands raised elsewhere. You've got Councillor Bolter and Philippa Fisher.
Oh, sorry. I'll go to Philippa first, please.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble. Just to respond to Councillor Lloydell's comment with regard to paying by cheque, Mr. Gill is absolutely right. I was aware of an incident today and an individual phoning the customer service centre. That is something that we're actually looking at the moment. So we can report back to council on the process for cheques. And as we quite clearly said, we don't want to disenfranchise anybody, but I just wanted to respond to that, bearing in mind that that actually sits within my area. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Councillor Bill Bolter.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, I listened very carefully to what's being said tonight. People know my feelings about charging for car parking. However, I want to keep some possibly an hour's free car parking for residents. Bearing in mind, this council took a decision a long while ago to charge for car parking. Nothing's changed there. All we're talking about is the amount of free car parking, not whether we charge at all. So that needs to be borne in mind. We already made that decision. When all this started, COVID started, the government said, spend whatever it takes, we reimburse you. We took them at the word, we spent a lot of money, we haven't got all the money back that we should have back. Whether we're going to get any more money, goodness only knows. So we're in a situation, not of our own making, but we've been dropped into this situation by COVID and by a government which left us hanging for money. Other things have cut as well. We don't get the support from the central government anymore that we did in the past. All the money has to come from within the borough itself, by residents themselves. So we are where we are with the budget. I think that Mr. Lloydell is going to make another recommendation to the two we already got. But I think that might be worthwhile doing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Bolter. I'll let you come back, Councillor Kaufman. Jeffrey?
Yeah, Chair, I just wondered, we've been speaking this evening on how much or how less the central government are supporting local authorities by. And I think it would be important that the residents are told how much our budget has shrunk over the last, shall we say, 10 years, and what percentage of the council's expenditure is supported by government now, and what it was 10 years ago or some convenient date. I think it's important because the government have been very clever in this one. They don't increase central taxes. They're reducing what they're sending centrally, which the taxpayer are paying, so that when the council tax goes up, when we have to make charges, it's the local authorities that get the blame, because unless it's pointed out to them, the average person in the street would not realise that it's caused by the fact that money coming from central government has dramatically decreased. And somehow I think Councillor Kevin Lloydell came out with something that the police authority produced, which showed the amount of the drop of central government support for local authorities and local police authorities. Something like that, maybe Philippa's department, but something like that, pointing out as to the reasons we're having to make these charges and changes.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey Kaufman. Are there any more speakers? Do we move to the recommendations? Councillor Kevin Lloydell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to put a recommendation C to the recommendations. By the by, a message to Councillor Kaufman. I've asked for that information through the leader for that chart to come to full council next week. Hopefully that will turn up. But my recommendation C, in addition to A and B, was that that the committee approve the consultation with all staff employees are invited to participate in shaping the future of the council by putting ideas forward on income generation, providing services differently and cost effective. That's the recommendation I'd like to put there. And I'll back that up with a proviso that we've already said in our papers here on page 18, staff resources, how important they are and so on. I think it's important that we empower people to come forward. We're all in this together. And I'm sure that somebody or some groups of people may come forward with some brilliant ideas that might help us form the shape of the future of our borough and the service that they provide. I also anticipate that perhaps maybe, so that we're all in this together, that perhaps chairs of the main committees form part of the consultation process with the employees. I think that's important. I think we'll get a long way to say we do support the employees. They are an integral part of this authority. They are part of our way of going on, and they can shape the future of this and anticipate. You could actually say a bit of competition there, somebody that comes up with a brilliant idea that saves money or services done in a different way that cuts the costs. You might want to say, well, there'll be a slight reward for that best idea going forward. I think it's got a lot of mileage in it. I hope members will support it because the staff are important and they need to have a say in what we do. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kevin Lloydell. I thoroughly support your recommendation and I will second your recommendation. Councillor Linda Broadley.
I was just going to second it myself, Chair.
I thought you were.
I was, because I worked for the local, not this local authority, but the county council for many, many years, not only in my substantive role, but in a union role. And when county council were looking at cutting budgets and things, one of the things I always said to them was ask the staff. Staff doing the job know where to save money. Mine was residential learning disabilities, But we knew areas where money could be saved, but nobody ever asked the staff. So I think, you know, you've seconded it. I'll third it if you like, because I think it's very important that staff are included. The staff doing the job tend to know where to save, even if it's just small amounts. Every bit counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broadley. Mrs. Ancourt.
Mrs. Court, you are muted.
Mute. Sorry, I always forget that. Yes, I mean, that is something that we do already, but yes, happy to look at that and, you know, bring that forward, you know, further. But just to assure you, it is something that we do already, but I'm happy to take that on.
Chair, if I could just make one comment with regard to what Mrs. Court has just said, which I fully support. The selective licensing scheme was the idea of a member of staff. It came from a staff member, and he put all of the work into it and eventually produced a scheme. So we do encourage staff to make suggestions, and where there is a business case, we do fully support them.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Are there any more questions from councillors? Shall we move to the recommendations and the vote? If that is the case,
Chair, sorry. Chair, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Boyce.
As I've already moved the motion, with Mr. Gill's permission, if I accept the amendment to the motion, that should allow us then to vote on the whole. Otherwise, you're going to have to vote twice.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce.
I totally agree. And whoever seconded the motion, the first motion, if they are also in agreement?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you. So, yes, you could take them as one composite motion now, Councillor Gamble.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Therefore, we shall go to the vote.
Okay, Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Bentley.
Abstain.
Councillor Bolter.
You're on mute, Councillor Bolter.
For.
Councillor Boyce.
For.
Councillor Broadley.
For.
Councillor Dar.
For.
Councillor Linda Eaton.
For.
Councillor Robert Eaton.
For.
Councillor Gamble.
For.
Councillor Joshi.
For.
Councillor Jeffrey Kaufman.
For.
Councillor Lily Kaufman.
For.
Councillor David Lloydall.
For.
Councillor Kevin Lloydall.
For.
And Councillor Ridley.
For.
Okay, Chair, so that's 14 votes in favour and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I think that's the end of the agenda.